Tonight, we have Irma Herrera. Now, Irma had a show, Why Would I Mispronounce My Own Name, for 5 months. It ran at the Marsh, an incredible show. And Irma's kind of like a citizen performer. She wasn't an actress all these years. No, she was a civil rights lawyer and still is a civil rights lawyer for the past 30 years. And now somehow became a performer. And we're going to find out why. But before we do Irma, we are going to start our show with a poem by Portia Nicole Kelly entitled Jokes. So Brian, my wonderful producer, and David Herrera, let's put on this video.
So a guy walks into a bar. A duck walks into a bar. A rabbi, a priest, and a minister walk into a bar. A white man with a Glock walks into a church. A white man with a handgun walks into an elementary school, a middle school, a high school, a college. A white man with a rifle, a shotgun, and a handgun walks into a theater. A white man with a rifle walks into a Las Vegas hotel. A white man with Mia Wilson's name on his knife walks into Bart. A white man with 2 chainsaws walks into Bart. A white man with a rifle and 3 handguns walks into a Jewish synagogue. A white man with a Glock walks into a club. A black boy with Skittles and tea walks down the street and is killed. A black man with a cell phone is killed. A black man with a wallet is killed. A black man with cigarettes is killed. A black man with a license to carry is pulled over and killed. A black man with a security badge is mistaken as a suspect and killed. All of these are jokes, but none of them are funny. A woman with a hijab looks like a terrorist. A man with a turban looks like a terrorist. A white man with khakis does not look like a terrorist. An immigrant is a threat to this country. Kaepernick's knee is a threat to this country. White men are not a threat to this country. America is on the other side of broken knock-knock jokes. Knock-knock, who's there? Justice, justice, who? Knock-knock, who's there? Compassion, compassion, who? Knock-knock, who's there? Truth, truth, who? Because what is justice or compassion or truth to a nation built on the backs of others? America is the comedian who's been in the game for decades and still ain't funny, tells the worst jokes known to mankind, then gets mad when you don't laugh. America is the attention-thirsty class clown who thinks disrupting a history lesson is humorous, gets kicked out of class only to come back the next day and do it all over again. America sang Donald Glover's lyrics long before he even wrote them. Its version of This Is America smiles like a purge mask. America is the perverted uncle who still gets to be a part of the family. Everybody knows how disgusting he is, but the unaffected don't say nothing. Have you heard the one about the immigrant? Spends his blood, sweat, and tears escaping to the American dream, only to arrive and be told he can no longer be a dreamer. Have you heard the one about the preteen? Just enough black to be seen as old enough to have a body become home to bullet wounds. Have you heard the one about the face the American flag represents, commits mass murders, but with the exception of suicide, has just enough Macaulay Culkin to keep him alive at the scene of the crime? Have you heard the one about the patriot? Claims all lives matter, but only supports the thin blue line and not the lives they've taken. Have you heard the one about the nation? Turns its back on injustice, then gets offended when you don't sing their favorite song, like a child who hits all the other kids on the playground, then wonders why don't nobody want to play with him. A racist walks into the Oval Office, becomes president, and encourages his followers to come out of hiding. They agree on things like building walls to keep people out of land that they stole, as they wear red hats that suggest the time during Jim Crow or the Chinese Exclusion Act, or any law that deemed non-whites as less than human, made this nation great. All of these are jokes, but none of them are funny. Thank you.
Whoa, 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 what a poem. What a performance of that poem. What a poem for these times, but I think actually it was done a few years ago. So just sends chills down my back and arms. So Irma, you brought this poem to our attention, right?
Hi, Stephanie, and hello, everybody. It's great to be here. So Sunday morning, I was listening to the news and I heard this poem and I Googled her name, but I was misspelling Portia. So I waited and the news hour played it again. And I wrote to the station and to Right Nowish, the podcast, and they posted the poem the following day. And then I contacted Portia and asked her permission to play the poem and found a version of her actually reciting the poem at La Peña in Berkeley in November of 2018. So this poem was written, I don't know when, but the performance was 2 years ago.
Wow. What a thing to find right now. Amazing, huh?
She says it all.
Yep, she says it all. And Irma, you've been saying a lot too with your show. But tell me first, tell me a little bit about you. Give us your version of your biography.
Well, I grew up in the town of Alice, Texas, which is 90 miles from the Mexican border, and a shout out to all my Tejano friends who are watching. And Alice has a population that is, when I was growing up, 70% Mexican American. It's probably now 90%. And it was as segregated as the Jim Crow South. I even went to a segregated parochial school. We only had a handful of Black families, but I didn't know any of them till we got to high school, and there were 2 African American kids. And I graduated school quite young and went off to college, and I was always seeing injustice. I didn't have a name for what I saw, and in the excerpts that I'll perform, some of that will come out. But I saw things that just didn't look right. Why was it that the white neighborhoods were so much nicer than the ones where we lived? Why was it that all our teachers were white people and all the people who had the important jobs? And I was fortunate enough to do well in school and to go off to college, worked a few years, and then decided to become a lawyer, inspired by the civil rights movement, inspired by the farm worker movement. And I headed off and moved to South Bend, Indiana, sight unseen, the University of Notre Dame. Joe Montana was there when I was in law school. And then I started my career in Eastern Washington, representing farm workers who were Spanish speaking, and then worked my way to San Francisco to be an attorney with the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund. And then I left law for a few years and worked as a journalist. And then I worked for a law firm for a few years. And then I went back into public interest law and was the executive director of Equal Rights Advocates, which is a women's legal advocacy organization that fights for equal treatment and fair opportunity for girls and women. And I did that for 15 years. And then I decided to take a year off, and that year has turned into 10 years. And so I never went back to law. I finally went on inactive status. So I'm no longer a lawyer. I'm a former lawyer, which is makes my life easier when friends call and want legal advice. I say, let me give you the disclaimer. I'm not licensed anymore. I'm on inactive, so I cannot give you legal advice, but I'll hear your story and maybe I can direct you somewhere. And then I discovered the Marsh. I always loved solo theater and I would go to the Marsh, but I ended up taking a class because my friend Diane Barnes encouraged me to sign up for a class with David Ford. And I fell in love with the art of solo performance and oral storytelling. And I repeated the class 3 times. And I would do these small 15, 20-minute student shows and beg my friends to show up, and they would. And I kept changing and revising the material, and eventually it turned into a full hour, 1-woman show, and I got it on stage. David Ford was my first director. I loved working with David Ford and continue to work with him as a consultant. But then Rebecca Fisher became my director, and she and I also have a wonderful time working together. So It takes a village, Stephanie. We have a very supportive community of solo performers in the Bay Area. People I took classes with who have met as a group, brought together by Andy and a bunch of us. We haven't been meeting for some time, but we continued working on our stories and refining them. And then I got a run at the Marsh and people showed up, and people have been saying when they see my play, it couldn't be more timely. And they say every time I revise it. So the issues that I talk about, race, white supremacy, they're at our doorstep in a bigger way than ever. And so I'm hoping that once theaters are open again, I'll be back at the Marsh.
We hope so too, Irma.
So that's kind of this, the brief or maybe long version of my story.
That's wonderful. You know, I've seen you from those first days to these days when you first had a run till 5 months later. And I've seen incredible growth, especially you came with us. The Marsh took on tour, went to APAP in January to get our shows out there to the world. And I saw you perform and I was just blown away because there's been quite a change in you. Because did you ever perform at all before you started this?
No, I have no background in theater. My husband just walked in and said, "Your glasses reflect, take them off."
Thank goodness for husbands.
He's watching in the next room. No, I didn't grow up doing theater. I never had a quest. I did grow up wanting to be funny and telling jokes and mimicking people. And there were some kids in my elementary school who also were very good mimics and who encouraged me to do that. And I've done that my whole life. You know, I have an ear for mimicry. And so I've worked on that and it's great fun. But no, I wasn't someone who grew up wanting to be an actor.
Well, what about those skills you developed as a lawyer? Did that come into play?
Very much. People ask me, how do you go from being a lawyer to being a playwright and a solo performer? And I tell people it's basically the same skill set. At heart, lawyers are storytellers. And we are telling our client's story, whether we are a public defender that is seeking to humanize and give voice and present a full picture of the person who's charged with a crime. If you represent a corporate entity, your job as the lawyer of this corporation is to make a compelling case to the trier of fact, whether it's a jury or a legislative body or an administrative board, about why your client wants to do X, Y, or Z. So I think lawyers are natural storytellers, or we develop storytelling skills. And also, having worked in public interest law, at the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, at Equal Rights Advocates, a lot of my job was public speaking. So I would go and give speeches and participate in panels for, you know, the subjects that we were working on. So I do have a lot of public speaking appearance. But I have to say that when I first started taking the class with David Ford, often I would show up. Still happens quite regularly. Rebecca Fisher will tell you, the first draft of anything I write looks like a legal document. It's like, that is so boring. Nobody will stay in the theater in their seats if you present that. And I'll argue and I'll say, but this is why it works. And sometimes when I'm in the middle of rehearsing a new part, I'll just stop and I'll say, that is like so not working. But my process is I write things and they're very precise and legalistic and detailed. And that's not how you tell stories in the theater. And sometimes.
So what happens? How do you flush it out? How do you make it that performative?
Well, Rebecca will say, or David Ford, I remember one time David Ford said, well, that's an interesting diatribe, but that's not theater. Sometimes I'll have 5 pages of text and then 3/4 of it will be crossed out. And then Rebecca will say, just tell the story. Don't provide all the details, all the fine points. And so I work it and rework it and rework it. And, you know, sometimes things work better than at others, but it is a process. And it's learning to paint with a broader brush.
So, did you have butterflies when you started being a butterfly, when you started being a lawyer? And did you have similar or different butterflies when you started performing?
Totally the same kind of butterflies. I told my family today, I don't know why, but I'm so nervous.
Right now. Are you nervous?
No, I'm not now, but all afternoon I was so nervous. I went out walking. I tried to think of what I want to perform, the little excerpt, trying to think of what you might want to talk about. So yes, and yesterday I was on a Zoom call with some young lawyers talking about the challenges of being young lawyers and hearing all of the anxieties that they have about whether they're good enough and whether they're adequately presenting their clients' cases. And it's the same feeling of nervousness and anxiety. You want to do a good job. You want to win. You want to win over. You want your story to be heard. And I think for people who are people of color, Chicanos, African Americans, we know that we are judged on a different standard. Our failures are a reflection of our entire group. So when you mess up, and you cannot do anything your whole life or a few years without sometimes messing up, but you have a brief that's not so great, or an oral argument, or a speech that didn't go so well, and you feel like you're carrying the weight for your whole community, that people are going to say, told you, we hired a Chicana lawyer and she's not that good. So there's a lot of anxiety that people live with when we are few and far between. Our errors really stick out. I remember having a conversation with a lawyer who's a good friend of mine, an older white man who's been very supportive of my career. And we were talking about the lack of African Americans at a law firm. And he said, well, you know, we've had African Americans, but they didn't work out. And I said, how many white men have you hired that didn't work out? Well, lots of them, but that's not remarkable, right? And so we know we have that pressure on us. And the flip side of that is that if you are successful, oftentimes people give you the message, oh, well, you're different. You know, you're different than the people from your group. You must be so much smarter. And it's just bullshit.
Well, do you feel that way about it when you're performing?
Well, when I'm performing, I want to do a good job. I hope people judge me on the merits for what I present, and that they listen to my story. I've gotten really good feedback from audiences, and that's part of what feeds my soul. People telling me, I learned things from your show. I see things in a different way. When I performed at the Marsh in San Francisco one day, this white middle-aged guy made a beeline to me on stage, and he said, you and I probably don't agree on anything. And I thought, okay. And he said, but you've given me a lot to think about. So I just want to thank you for that. And I said, well, thank you so much for coming. And then I wondered, who brought this guy? Did he just stumble into the Marsh or what? So I feel like I'm presenting information that people want to hear, need to hear, didn't know. And hopefully the role, I think, of art is to change people's hearts, to open their hearts.
So, but just to get back to it, you felt like you had, you know, that you were representative as a lawyer, you were representative of your particular group, right?
Absolutely.
Do you feel that same way when you're performing? Is it that same kind of, I don't know what you call it, but you know what I mean, I think.
I feel less of that, but I also feel that if I go and perform somewhere and for some reason I don't draw the audiences or I have a bad night, that the theater might say, you know, those Mexican Americans, those Latinos, they just don't draw people into the theater. So, you know, maybe we won't have them anymore. I have a bunch of friends who are writers, and one of my friends always is encouraging people of color who write to submit our manuscripts. And Linda always says, send in your manuscripts, because even if you get rejected, I don't want them to be saying there aren't any Latina writers out there. There aren't any African-American writers. There aren't Asian. We are out there and we're doing all sorts of things. So yes, I do feel that I have that added burden.
Well, I don't even know what to say, but I'm glad that you're at the Marsh, and I'm so glad to have seen your trajectory. How many years is it now since you started?
I got my show on stage 4 years ago. I just looked it up. I first performed at Ross Valley Players, and the play was called Tell Me Your Name. It's changed a lot since then. And I think I started taking David Ford's class a couple of years before then. So I have been really lucky. I've worked hard, but I've also gotten some good breaks because a lot of people work for many, many years, and it's hard to get your work on stage and to keep it going and to keep it fresh. And luckily, my subject matter allows me to keep revising my play. So some scenes are pretty static. You know, what happened in my childhood is portrayed as it is, but as it affects my perceptions of what's happening today, and what's happening today, there's always new material. So when COVID-19 started and we realized that it was having a disproportionate impact on Latinos and African Americans, I thought, well, before I go back on stage, I have to say something about that. I don't know what. And then we had these awful murders, finishing with the George Floyd horrific murder, and all of the protests and the activism that has come about as a result of that. I don't know what I'm going to do with that. The last time I revised my play was after the killings at the Walmart in El Paso. So it's like, if you're talking about social justice, and if you're writing about the impact of prejudice and racism and the dehumanization of entire populations, how could I not put that in my play? And so I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm just taking it all in, and I'm amazed, and I'm just excited and pleased that there is so much desire to make change and to make meaningful change, and to get at the root of white supremacy. And people are coming out in support from all sorts of places. The Washington State Supreme Court justices issued a dramatic letter saying racism and white supremacy is very much alive, and we need to address it. And we have made decisions in prior years that have hurt Black people and continue to hurt Black people. And we need to address that. So I feel like we are at a moment of opportunity to see major changes in the structure of our society, because we're all in the same boat and we're going to sink if we don't address the racism, the anti-Black sentiment that is really destroying the soul of our country.
Yep. Well, Irma, you know, what your career, your life, your trajectory is what, you know, is this diamond of what you put, what you bring to us and what you bring to us with your show. And before we do an excerpt from it, do you have something, because we called you all citizen performers. You didn't grow up as a performer. You know, people who just have a story to tell, and you've just taken it, Zoom. You have Zoom with it, and you on Zoom right now, in fact. And not only have you Zoomed with it, but you know how to gather people around you. Like every show, after your show, you had an amazing panel about amazing social justice issues with amazing peoples that were, you know, reflected that you could then talk about your show. And you worked extremely hard, not just at developing it, but just as hard as bringing it to the people and putting it within a context that, you know, we support at the Marsh, that we want you to have panels after, you know, and that's a way that someone who might not be a 6-time star can bring in communities. And you've just done an incredible job of that. So I want to know if you want to just to speak to that, and the people out there who may be listening, who might have their own story, you know, and how meaningful that is to us and to our lives and to us, our changes and our what's going on now, for instance.
Yeah, well, when I got the opportunity to present at the Marsh, I came to you and your folks and said, I would like to have speakers after each show on topics that touch upon the issues that are part of my play. And so I presented a list of potential speakers. I had talked to these people. These are folks who work in immigrants' rights advocacy, people who are doing racial justice work and implicit bias training, folks in the LGBT community. I mean, the youth to prison pipeline. I mean, the school to prison pipeline that is curtails life opportunities for so many kids of color. And these folks were really excited to be part of the discussion after my show. And when I contacted Portia Kelly, the poet, whose poem opened tonight's show, I told her about my talkback series. And I said, when my show is back at the Marsh, would you be willing to do a talkback after my show? And she said yes. So I'm really excited about possibly focusing more on bringing artists from communities of color and young African-American spoken word poets, painters, people who are putting their hearts out on the walls, on video, to talk about what it's like for them right now, because the closest distance between two people is a story. Now, that's one of my favorite quotes. It's not mine. It was written by a woman whose name escapes me right now. Her name is Patty Dye. She's a social justice activist trainer, a white woman from the South somewhere. And when I saw that quote, it really resonated with me. The closest distance between two people is a story. And I think we can reach people's hearts in ways that statistics and data, they just don't cut it. I recently heard somewhere that I think it was Stalin who said, the murder of millions of people, statistics. The death of one is a tragedy.
Well, yeah.
And that is the George Floyd story. A very terrible tragedy to a family, to his friends, to his community, has given us a much bigger story about the work that's ahead for us.
Yes, it has. So Irma, are you ready to do an excerpt from your show?
Sure, I'm gonna do, well, I'm just gonna do it. Maria. That's my Starbucks name. I picked it because it's easy to understand and rolls off the tongue beautifully. And as I am of the Latinx persuasion, the name fits me. And let's be real, 50-50 odds that any random Latina you meet is named Maria. My real name. I had my cups reversed. My real name, this 4-letter word, IRMA. I know it looks like Irma to some of you. And that is one pronunciation of this name. But the name that my parents gave me is Irma. How about I teach you how to say Irma? I have a lot of professional experience. See, I was a teaching assistant at the Department of Modern Languages at the University of Notre Dame. This is how I put myself through law school. Okay, to say Irma, you need to first smile. And holding that smile, say I. Now, Irma. You are smarter than my Notre Dame students. Now, we all meet people with names that we have never seen or heard before. It is always okay to ask someone to help you get their name right. My spouse suggested to me, tell people that they can remember your name by thinking of earmuffs. My sensitivity about names starts in South Texas when I'm just this little muchachita. And it starts with my favorite uncle, my tío Otilio. He's married to my mother's older sister. Any guesses as to her name? Yes, her name is Maria. Now, the name Otilio is not that common, but it's not difficult. 3 syllables, Otilio. I bet you all can say it. Just repeat wherever you are. Otilio. Easy, right? We so look forward to their visits. A couple of times a month, Tío Otilio and Tía Maria drove 28 miles from the town of Robstown to come pay us a Sunday afternoon visit. And one of the things we loved about the visits is that they always brought a box of freshly baked pastries from the Mexican panaderia. And inside, my favorites, empanadas, filled with sweet, spicy pumpkin, and marranitos. For those of you that aren't familiar with Mexican pastries, this is our gingerbread cookies. You bake them in the shape of gingerbread men, but we have pot-bellied pigs, thus the name marranito. In the kitchen, my mother would make coffee for the grown-ups, and we kids had a special treat, chocolate mexicano, which she frothed with an old wooden batidor. We knew the visit was over when Tío Otilio stood, put his hands in his pocket, and pulled out nickels, dimes, and quarters and gave them to us kids. Gracias, tío. That was our spending money for candy, cookies, maybe even to see a movie. One day, I'm with my parents and we're driving to Corpus Christi for a doctor's appointment, and we stop at Tío Otilio and Tía Maria's house. And just as Tía is greeting us at the door, we hear the loud rumble of the big company truck that Tío drives, delivering gravel. While the grown-ups sit around talking, I notice that Tío's shirt has a patch with letters on it. I'm 6 years old and just learning to read, and I sound out the letters T-O-M. Tom? In the car, I say to my dad, why Tío's shirt says Tom? Porque that's what they call him at work. Do people have different names at work? No, mijita. It's that the Americanos can't say Otilio, so they call him Tom. But why Tío doesn't teach them how to say his name? Ay, Claudio, esta muchachita tan preguntona. Why she always asking? Too many questions. And now, fast forward to about halfway through the play, And I'm going to do another mini scene. Every summer, the Alice Echo, our town's afternoon newspaper, runs a story about the record-breaking heat, along with a picture of some fool frying an egg on the sidewalk. It was that hot in Alice. Fried eggs remind me of the first Teflon pan my mother bought. We loved that pan so much that on one of that she bought an extra one to give to Tia Maria. And on one of their Sunday visits, I demonstrated to Tia that you can make a perfect fried egg, mire Tia, without any Crisco. ¡Qué invención tan buena! ¿Cómo son inteligentes esos americanos? Tia, you don't know that Teflon was invented by an Anglo. Pues creo que sí, sobrina, porque ellos tienen más educación. She was right about that. White people had far higher levels of education than Mexican Americans, and Teflon was indeed invented by a white man. Our elders called white people los americanos. Por favor, don't call them that. You were born here. You're Americans. We're Americans too. Sí, muchacha. I know that. Pero it's what we have always called them. And you stop telling me how to talk. Mostly we called white people Anglos, but we had other names for them. We called them güeros, olíos, blancos, and gabachos. The word gabacho almost always preceded by the all-purpose modifier pinche, as in ese pinche gabacho. Now, the word pinche has multiple definitions. It can mean stingy, it can mean irritating and bothersome, or it can be a substitute for the F-bomb. Ese pinche teenager almost mowed me down with his scooter. And white people, oh, they had a robust vocabulary of names for us. They called us beaners, cucarachas, greasers, mezquins, spics, tacos, wetbacks. But the word illegal was not used back then to dehumanize our community. Some words have huge emotional charge attached to them. And one of those words is racist. But most people find it hard to believe that what they think or say could ever be racist. Thank you.
Oops, I was muted. Thank you so much, Irma. That was wonderful. I'm gonna say one thing. You know, I get up and announce shows at the Marsh. And I'll never forget, I got up and I announced your show. It might have been your opening. And I said, now let's welcome Irma Herrera to the stage. And after the show, and we always have the post-performance parties, this man came up to me and said, you pronounced her last name wrong.
Oh, my friends, they're always standing up for me.
So, I mean, even when you're trying, you can mess up. I did, you know, I was trying and I want to be good. I always want to be good. And I just messed it up.
But you know what, Stephanie? We all mess up sometimes on all these things. I was listening to an interview, I think it was with Conan O'Brien and W. Kamau Bell. And it was about, well, what can white people do in this fight against white supremacy? And he actually, W. Kamau Bell gave him some concrete assignments of things to do, but they also talked about, people are going to get some things wrong. We're all learning and growing, and I do correct people when they mispronounce my name. And I know that sometimes even dear friends get my name wrong. And, it's the intention. And if you get someone's name wrong, you can say, I'm sorry, and move on.
Yes, you can. Kamau used to perform at the Marsh. You know that, right?
You know that. And I want to give a shout out to Bruce Packman, who used to work with Kamau Bell. They were collaborators, because Bruce has been such a tremendous supporter of my work. When I first contacted him to be on Solo Sunday, which is another venue for solo shows in San Francisco, he wrote me a nice note that said, thank you very much, keep working on your craft and get in touch later. Maybe not quite exactly like that, but he didn't feel that I was ready to get on stage. But over the years, he has just been such a great person in terms of giving me feedback. And I changed my play name because of a question that he asked me. My play used to be called Tell Me Your Name. And he said, are you wedded to the name of your play? It's like, interesting question. And he said, because I think you could use a different title that tells you more about what the content of your play is. So he said, go and look at your script. There probably is a line there or a phrase that has more heat to it. And that may be a better title. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And as I was leaving, we were meeting in person, pre-COVID times. As I was leaving, I said to him, here's the deal, Bruce. Like, I have no control over whether other people can say my name correctly or want to say my name correctly. But why would I mispronounce my own name? And he said, that would be a good title. And it's long, but it tells you something.
It certainly does. And Kamau is another one who's got a really hard name to pronounce. Kamau actually used to tech Bruce's shows like in the 1980s and or 90s, early 90s. And I never said his name right. Finally, he taught me how. Like a cow, he said. Like a cow. Kamau, like a cow, because I would call him Camus, Camus. It could be a big problem for certain names.
Yeah, well, and it is helpful if people can give you something that is familiar that you can attach it to, like earmuffs. It's kind of silly, but it's not it's ear. Irma.
Exactly. So do you have plans for a new show, or you just feel like filling this one out for some more time?
I'm not done with this show. I feel like it keeps changing and growing, so I'm not sure what I'll do with it. I am very excited about this new venture that I have. I started what I call my stairwell teatro. And it's me telling 3 to 5, 6-minute stories from the stairwell of my home. And they're stories about names. And it's been great fun because I collect a lot of stories. People write me, people text me after my shows, people tell me stories after I present on Zoom at different functions. And I don't quite know what to do with those stories because they don't fit in my play, but they are often illustrative of the kind of conflicts we have in society and how some groups have a higher status than others. And certainly Latinos have lower status and our names aren't respected. Have you ever heard newscasters mispronounce French names? Yeah, maybe sometimes, but they work hard at getting them right. They don't get particularly, interested in correcting. Well, they don't even know. And if there were more people from various communities in the newsroom, maybe this wouldn't be a problem. So an example of one of my stairwell teatros, I heard a newscaster call our state attorney general Xavier Becerra. Well, he pronounces his name Javier. So I wrote her an email and told her this, and she wrote me back and said, thank you. No one had ever brought it to my attention. Well, you'd think that an editor in the newsroom, or she might have learned along the way, but she didn't know. You don't know what you don't know. Once you know, you do better. So, they're just little stories that I share, and I'm getting really positive feedback. 500, 600 people watch my little teatro episodes. So I'm having fun doing that. I probably will put one out once a week. It's hard work to edit a little tiny video clip. So once or twice, once or every 2 weeks, I'll be getting a new story out. And I don't know whether that'll go anywhere, but I'm having a whole lot of fun doing it. And I get to research topics that are of interest to me. Like most people don't know that in California, you cannot put an accent in someone's birth certificate, marriage certificate, death certificate. You can register Jose Peña, but there's no accent over the E and no tilde over the M. There have been efforts to change that law, and it has been unsuccessful. Strange, because when California became a state, for 30 years, every law in California was produced in English and Spanish. We were a fully bilingual state. So tell me what that tells you about the esteem in which the Latino community is held in.
Well, do you think it's just about esteem? What is that really about? What is it about, Irma? What is it?
I think what it's really about is like, they want us to have English names. I think it's that simple. This is America. Call yourself Irma. Well, you wouldn't tell Bianca to call herself Blanche. And I think Blanche is even well, no, that's not a Blanche. Yeah, it's a French word. So like, what is an American name in any case, right?
So do you think they use things like, well, the Enye is too hard to do on the typewriter? And
hello? Can you do an N on your computer? You just hold down the N and then you hit 1 or 2 and it puts the symbol.
Isn't it option NN?
Maybe that's an easier way of doing it. I have a different way of doing it. But I think when you've had the control of the law, the legal making process, which is changing, California has changed a lot. And our country is changing a lot. When I became a lawyer and moved to California in 1980, there was one woman on the California Supreme Court and one African-American man. As of a couple of years ago, there was no white man in the California Supreme Court, and the majority of the justices were women. Today, there's one white guy on the California Supreme Court. So I think that, we are seeing change, but we still have so much to do. And I think the moment is here to really address the issue of structural racism and anti-Black sentiment, which is so strong. And I think for communities of color, for Latinos, for Asians, for Muslims, all our groups have been subjected to all kinds of discrimination. Gay, lesbian, disabled community. It's not that we want to minimize the wrongs that have been done to these communities, but I think it's really important right now to put our focus on Black lives. And so I really feel that that's something that all of us need to think about. What is our role and what can we do within our sphere of influence to really address the structural racism in our country?
Have you come up with some things?
I do things through my writing. I think I've seen a lot of writing by white people addressed to other white people. I think white people, it's on you to educate yourselves about the history of Jim Crow, the history of slavery, the history of Jim Crow. I just heard a guy who wrote a book about the Texas Rangers who acted much the way the Klan did in the South. People need to educate themselves so that you understand why it doesn't fall well in our ears when people say all lives matter. Well, of course, all lives matter, but until Black lives matter, yeah, no, we've got to really keep our focus. So I think the first thing is educating yourself, you as the person who runs the theater. And I'm happy that I do see diverse voices at the theater. I love David Herrera. I'm not going to start naming because I've loved so many things. And not necessarily must you be a person of color to talk about issues that affect communities of color. Dan Hoyle's play being one example. Enormously moving, enormously moving. So there are many, many ways in which people can be active. I live in the town of El Cerrito, next to Berkeley in the East Bay. And a week ago, a woman, I never met her before, masked woman with gloves came to my front door and had a bunch of flyers and said, I understand you know a lot of people in the neighborhood. Can you distribute these? We're going to have a silent vigil Monday night, 7 to 7:15. I said, okay. So she gives me a map with like 8 blocks. I go and distribute things, masked, wearing gloves, to neighbors, talk to a few people, see some signs with Black Lives Matter. I walk out on Monday at 7 o'clock in my neighborhood, and there were hundreds of people on the street, all masked. I was in tears because I had no idea, and all up and down. I live on a major street. The entire neighborhood, part of Richmond, part of El Cerrito, where so many people came out, and people were holding up signs like "Remember in November." And when we distributed the flyer said, it isn't just about showing up in support of our African-American neighbors and friends and community. It's about what changes are we going to make in our own lives, in our community, in the election, so that we can really get mobilized and get to know each other and work as teams. So I think there's so much, and right now you can watch all kinds of things free on Netflix, on PBS. And if you're on social media at all, or if you read a newspaper or just Google, there's all kinds of things to educate oneself. And that's the first step. Knowledge is power, and then acting on that knowledge.
Thank you, Irma. Thank you.
There's always something you can do. Call out, call out when you hear people saying racist things. They feel licensed to say them in front of you. I don't mean just you, Stephanie, but white people hear other people. I hear people say anti-gay things. I stand up and I say, no, that's not okay. Right? Standing up because it's the right thing to do. We can be silent no more. And I think right now, just like we saw in the Me Too movement, all of a sudden, all these major titans of industry began to fall because their dirty little secrets weren't secret anymore. And I think we're going to see some real restructuring with people high up losing their jobs because they're closet racists. And we need to be addressing the problem. It's not mine or new. People have said that racism is a more dangerous virus than COVID-19. And it's been with us for 400 years, and it's going to be with us until we tackle it and get rid of it.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm not sure, producer, Mr. Brian, is our chat going? Is there anyone that wants to ask a question of Irma? We just have a couple of minutes left.
I lost track of time. It's that time already?
Yeah. Do you have any more butterflies, or have they all flown the coop?
They've flown the coop.
Butterflies have become chickens and they've flown the coop. Yes, but are there any questions that we're hearing, or I'm not sure what's happening with the chat because we did have some bad Zoom bombing going on. So we've had to limit. It's sad. But
Well,
it's very much the same thing in a way.
Okay, well, I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to have presented my show at the Marsh, and I look forward to bringing it back. And I'm so thrilled that so many of my friends and colleagues showed up to watch this conversation tonight. And I'm really, really happy that the Marsh has so many things going on every single night. And it's all free, and we don't have to look for parking in the Mission or in downtown Berkeley.
Well, we have to balance that out. We've got this and we've got that. They're two different experiences,
Yeah.
Hopefully equally good.
Yes.
So thank you, Irma. Thank you so much. This
Thank
was
you,
an
Stephanie.
incredible conversation and an incredible performance.
Thank you very much. And bye, everybody.
So keep coming back to MarshStream next week. We have David Ford. Irma has been vastly impacted by the work of David Ford, as have so many performers over the past 30 plus years now, from Marga Gomez to Josh Kornbluth to Irma to so many people. So come back and next week and join me when we have David, the maestro of solo performance himself. And he's bringing some performers along that he's currently working with. And come back for bingo and fitness and singing and solo arts heals and Monday night and sing-alongs. We're doing it all at MarshStream, as well as having a youth program. We'll be back. We've had a little hiatus, and we'll be doing youth program probably every day at 4 o'clock if you want to see some youth programs as well. So everybody, let's have a good week. Let's get out there and do the good work, supported by the things Irma was saying. Thank you so much for being a point there. An incredible point. See you next week at Stephanie's MarshStream. Oh, and I haven't mentioned the tip jar. You know, with no parking, like everybody that would pay for parking, put it in the tip jar. The Marsh has no earned income. We are generally about 70% earned income. We are trying to stay alive. So put some money in our tip jar, become a member. Think of MarshStream as your solo performance broadcast. KQED. Just like you join KQED, join the Marsh. So thank you very much. Thank you, the producers, Brian and David, everyone that works, the wonderful performance and performer, Irma. And thank you all for joining us. Stay healthy and in good spirits.